Well, I was feeling nervous this morning, and I realized that this isn't, despite all of those wonderful, prestigious names that were just read, I can tell you that this doesn't seem nearly as scary as it looked to watch my fourth grader be in a spelling bee this morning. And so he gave me courage, standing up and spelling words. Let me start. I think it will be helpful for some context. I've been working with the United Way for 3 or 4 years now in varying capacities, and they've been a great partner. I've wanted to do something in the community. I've seen some needs, and I have this sort of passion of my own around mental health issues. And they came to me and said, as part of our community assessment, we've realized that this is a big issue and we'd really like to do something. I didn't realize how motivated they were at the time, but I've been so grateful to be a part of this group and to be asked to do something like this. When I came to them, I said I had some conditions. It might sound presumptuous. I'm just a young physician and naive in some ways, but I came and I said, there's a couple of things I don't want to happen. Number one, a mental health initiative cannot get into a complicated discussion about what mental health is or what mental illness is. And sometimes I think really well-intentioned programs, we talk about raising awareness and decreasing the stigma. And inevitably, conversations start like, well, this is just like diabetes or heart disease, or this is just like that, or mental health is or isn't this. And I think I'd like to avoid those if I could. I think that just complicates what we need to do to be helpful. The second condition I had was we can't go around the community and talk about mental illness in a way that makes everyone leave feeling like they need to find a therapist. Because we can't, number one, accommodate more people in most mental health clinics. I have some pediatrician friends here, and I feel the need to say at the outset that we are not looking for any referrals as part of this. Most mental health clinicians are overwhelmed trying to keep up with demand right now. And so I told the United Way that any sort of initiative had to be helpful, had to focus on the right things, and had to empower people to more meaningfully respond to problems that they see. Because, again, I don't think the answer in most cases is to go get professional help. And hopefully that becomes clear as we talk. So some objectives. Number one, learn a new way of thinking about children's mental health and behavior. 2, apply a simple and practical framework to understand and support mental and emotional needs. 3, increase your confidence to build resilience, improve motivation, and respond to the emotional crises of others. Hopefully those will make sense as we go along, and if we come close to those objectives, I'll be just tickled. This is Utah County youth. There's data that's collected every year in the schools called the SHARP data, Student Health and Risk Prevention data. And one of those questions that's particularly interesting to me is this one, which a mental health professional will identify as a pretty good screening question for depression. It asks youth between 8th and 12th grade to answer this question. During the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that you stopped doing some unusual activities? And you can see 2001, 13, 15, and 17. This is Utah County data, but I can tell you it parallels roughly what you would see throughout the state of Utah. Now, I think the question that most people are asking themselves right now, tell me if I'm right, this is where I read your minds. What's causing this? And this is the most common question that I get as a child psychiatrist. They find out I'm a psychiatrist and they say, hey, I want to ask you something. And I almost know that they're going to ask me, why are we seeing more anxiety and depression in kids? Is it cell phones? That's, I think, the most common theory. Altitude? Schools? It's these school systems and the way that they're putting all this pressure on these kids. What am I missing? What theories do we have? Pollution? Genetically modified foods? Moral decay in society? Video games? Violence in the media? Am I missing anything? I hope to take a jab tonight at my response to what's causing these increases that we're seeing in anxiety and depression. But before I do that, I want to do what I call a thought experiment. Imagine that you have a friend who's decided to run a race, maybe a marathon. And they're training, they're practicing, they're doing everything that they think they have to do. They've been at it for a while, and they come to you one day and they say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't get past mile 8. I know that's a long ways from a marathon, I know. I can't get past mile 8. You're a runner, what can you tell me? This is my problem. Depending on your bias, the way that you look at problems, the way that you might evaluate things or your own experience, I submit that you will have one of many working theories or categories to focus on. I'm going to call one biological. You might say you need to focus on better sleep, nutrition, stretching, weight, genetics. You know, maybe look at you. You know, you're just genetically, it's just not going to happen. Psychological. You might focus on ways to improve motivation, self-reflection. You really got to build yourself up. Maybe you have a spiritual perspective and you say, have you tried a little prayer before you run? Social. It's all about peer motivation, training together, a bigger cheering section, link up in a social media group, make somebody make you accountable. Educational. Focus on the education or the person's knowledge about running, physiology, the course. Maybe there's some books that you would hand them. Or maybe you have an environmental perspective and you say, well, you have to run at night or in the morning or in different clothes or shoes. I don't know. My question is, which is right? Why is this person having a hard time running? Don't know. All of those? None of those? Likely it's some combination of all of it. What if we make this question more complicated and we say, why are kids struggling with anxiety and depression? You might have a biological explanation, psychological, environmental, there were a number of those, spiritual, social. I think we do this because we want to have an explanation, but let me authoritatively, if I can be so bold, say that we don't know what causes these things. The best research we can come up with are that these things are variably determined or multifactorial. There's a lot that goes into why somebody struggles. In fact, neurobiologists these days will say that if you're ever finding yourself asking, is this a biological or a psychological problem, the question is bioillogical. Because there's so much that we know about. This is where, in fact, when I used to give this presentation, this is where I got really nerdy and excited about what we know about all of the interconnectedness of these different categories. And we talk about interpersonal neurobiology with mirror neurons. And we talk about epigenetics and social learning and attachment theory and the way that adverse childhood experiences affect your biology over time. What we know in modern science is that you cannot separate these things. It's not so simple. And so when you look at these really complex problems, there's a lot that goes into why somebody is probably struggling with anxiety, with depression, with addiction, you name it. So that's discouraging. We can feel helpless in never fully understanding causes and in the dark about how exactly to fix it. So we can sit around and say, wow, this is a real problem. We don't know what's causing it, and doesn't that feel great? Or you can feel confident by remembering what people ultimately need. And it's often not for you to be able to tell them why they have a problem. Have you considered that? What do I mean? What do people need? This is a pyramid that is sort of an approximation of what has been called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Has anyone heard of that before? Is that a psychology class? We have accomplished, educated people here. It's often in the poster on the back of the room that you talk about for 5 minutes and then move on. But as I've become more and more experienced and worked with more and more patients, I have to tell you, this is a really underappreciated little bit of psychology when it comes to really addressing even the most complex problems. Because it addresses what people need. It puts aside this idea that I can find out what the causes of your suffering and fix it. And it asks, what do you need and what can I help care for, knowing that everybody needs the same things? So the theory goes that physical needs are at the bottom, that without physical needs being addressed or considered or cared for, the rest of it is really hard to make progress with. We considered having tonight's dinner be sort of an interactive experience where we hold the food and get you guys hungrier and hungrier and see how your learning goes. Because when you're hungry, it's hard to think about other needs that you have. What do we mean by safety? This trips people up because people say, well, our kids are safe. This is a safe community. It's a first world country. I go to great lengths to helicopter parent my kids so that they'll be safe. Safety means psychological safety. It means that you're safe to talk. It feels safe to explore and to try new things. That they feel safe to separate, to fail. Do our kids feel safe to fail? Safe to be yourself, to be you. Safe to feel strong emotions. It's okay that you feel that way. How do you communicate that it's okay to feel? And I'll tell you, people, I don't think we really appreciate how important this rung on this ladder is. Because kids come in to see me, and I ask about kind of safety and communication at home. They say, oh yeah, we're great, we have a great relationship. And I take these kids, often teenagers, into another room and talk with them, and they tell me all kinds of things where I go, we have to tell your parents. And they look at me and they say, I could never tell my parents that. And so safety means allowing these kids to talk and to feel and to fail and to be and to experiment. Now we'll talk about some examples later. Connection. How do kids feel connected? I like the word connected even though it's hard for me to define. It's just that, we do all these things to try to have good experiences and to have memorable moments with our kids, to share and express love. But there's those moments that connection is happening. It's like, sometimes it's as simple as a smile or a shared joke or really looking at your kids. It's that feeling of being seen and appreciated. So you can connect by seeing them. You can connect through shared experiences like I mentioned. You often need persistence to connect. And here's a little, psychological pearl. If you're stuck and don't know what to do, just say that. Parents say, I don't know what to say. And I say, well then go to your child and say, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to talk to you. I don't know how to be close to you, but I want you to know that I want to. I wish there was some way that you and I could be closer. So even if you're kind of stuck, you need to persist and insist on connection. If every day you thought about, have I connected with the kids in my life? You'd feel differently about your relationships. I think that would make a meaningful difference. I do this with my patients. There's a lot of stuff I have to get through. I'm often spending a lot of time with parents. The kid is kind of playing and doing other things. But I know that it is not fair to end that appointment and to have them to go home unless I've done something to have a moment with that child. So connection, sometimes we have to insist. With teenagers that are really prickly, sometimes I'll say, hey, when you're done chewing that gum that you're chewing, maybe I could have it, and then I'll feel closer to you. And then they laugh. The play therapists are fond of saying, lose your dignity to find your child. Sometimes it requires a little silliness to connect. And then confidence. How do we build confidence? On the platform, the framework of safety and connection, how do we help our kids have a growth mindset? Hopefully you're familiar with what that means, but this idea that you're always growing. Our kids think that their life is about performance, that it's not about progress. They say things to me like, oh, I'm really stressed out because I'm in 9th grade now, and 9th grade counts. Don't you hate that? I hope we never say that. It counts. Now you've grown, you've become who you're going to become, and from now on, just so you know, we're going to be measuring you as opposed to continuing to facilitate learning and growth. So this idea that growth matters and that we as adults have the perspective when they're going through difficult times to not be the ones freaking out and to say, I just love watching you grow as you work through this. And we express confidence in them, that they feel like we believe in them. Sometimes I think for teenagers, the best way to help them feel confident is to express confidence. You got this. You'll figure it out. Give yourself some time. Be patient. See the long road. We have some other ideas we could talk about, but a big part of Everyday Strong is figuring out how to build confidence, how to build skills on the foundation of those other needs. And then thriving is what we talk about, this idea of self-actualization or becoming. Once we've met these needs, then a child has the ability to sort of thrive, to become. Now, we may not be able to control what that looks like. I want to do a quick thought experiment as we talk about safety, connection, and confidence. Another one, so bear with me, humor me here. Imagine that you started work one day, or whatever it is that you're doing. You have a busy day ahead of you, and your boss comes to you and says, hey, I got this thing I need you to do sometime today. You say, great, I got it. And then you go on with your day, and your day happens, like often is the case. And you're busy, and you're getting a lot done. And it's one of those days where you kind of feel proud of yourself for doing so much and for being so productive. Maybe you gave up your lunch break to help a colleague or to sit with a patient longer or to do something else. And at the end of the day, you're feeling pretty good. You're like, I ruled today. And then the boss walks by and says, hey, did you do that thing that I asked you to do? And you go, no, I didn't do it. And he or she lays into you. Why do we keep you on? What was the one thing I needed you to do? Can't you just do this one thing for me? You know, and you go home feeling demoralized. Okay, still with me? Maybe this has really happened. Maybe you're having to use your imagination. And you talk to your significant other when you get home and you tell them what happened. Now, I want you to consider that that person could do one of four things. They could invalidate you. Why didn't you just do it? I mean, you had all day. Seems like it was a pretty big deal. They could not really listen. What? Honey? Yeah? Oh, okay. Or they could try to fix it. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Go in early tomorrow, buy bagels, bring them to the group, write a little card, leave it on the boss's. You got this. We'll fix it. Or the fourth thing is they could say, I'm so sorry. Thank you for telling me. I can see how hard you try. What are you going to do? Is there anything I can do to help? Did you see what I did there? You made it safe to talk because you said, I'm sorry, tell me more. You didn't jump in. You connected by giving your attention and saying, I see you. And then you got right to their confidence needs by either collaboratively solving the problem with them or saying, you got this. That's empathy. And that feels better. But do you know what teenagers experience when they come home and they have a C? And they go, and the parents go, why do you have a C? And they go, because I hate the teacher. He's such a jerk. Do you know what parents say? Well, I've noticed you haven't really studied very much. I mean, maybe you could have put forth a little more effort and validation. Or they say, well, here's what we're going to do. I'll call the school tomorrow. We'll fix this. You know, we're going to sort this out. Don't worry. Or they don't listen, right? Those other things. And teenagers need the same thing that we need. They need us to say, oh, that must be really discouraging. Tell me more. We need to be safe for them to keep talking and to have those feelings, even though inside you're freaking out that they have a C. If it means I tell parents, if it means putting duct tape over your mouth, do it. Because if you interrupt them or judge them or invalidate them, they're going to stop talking. And if you have a teenager that's not talking, it's because he's felt those things. So this is a new lens. It's not a program. It's not something to go home and do. I want people to look at problems this way, to look at a problem with anxiety and depression and not say, what's causing this problem? What in the world is wrong with society? To say confidently, what are the needs that we can just try to address? How can we be helpful? We promised that this would be a new way of thinking. That was one of our learning objectives. So why is it a new way of thinking? You might be sitting there thinking, well, this is obvious so far. But I think as we've done this presentation and talked to people, there's a few things that aren't appreciated that are implications of believing this. One is that you have to start believing that children want to do good. They want to be good. This is a theory of, this theory is what we considered a humanistic theory. So Maslow. It's this idea that people are born with this innate desire to grow. They want that. And we need to just sort of create the environment like a garden so that they can do that. It's not this blank slate thing where I need to teach and mold and create this person. And so you have to have this bit of faith to step back and say, kids want to be good. Out the window then is everything I hear in my office that sounds like, well, they're lazy or unmotivated or manipulative, or I think they just don't try. They've chosen the wrong friends. They choose not to be successful or to do their homework. They choose to be mean. I don't know what to tell you, Dr. Swenson. He's lazy. Okay? If you believe this, then you would look at those kids and say, these kids want to do well and to be good, so what's missing? How can we better support those needs? Because even those kids, that son who's in the basement and playing Xbox all the time and not doing his homework and not going out and driving his parents crazy, when he's in my office and I say, I get a ruler out, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you want to be successful in school? Do you know what he says? 10, 9. You know, his parents' jaw hits the floor. Why aren't you showing it? Right? So there's a difference between what these kids want. They want friends. They want to have good family relationships. They want to be successful. And if they're not doing it, then we need to ask ourselves what's going on. Okay? So kids want to be good. You know, I feel like it's only fair, if you'll allow another small tangent, I consider myself a reasonably good parent. My wife is here. I'm above average, not great. But above average because I have this gift where I'm thinking about kids all day long, and I go home and at the doorstep I go, okay, how are my own children doing? And I think that's one of the blessings of doing what I do. But there are days where I lose it, and I'm terrible. I mean, even today when I was preparing this presentation, my 3-year-old kept trying to sit on my lap. I kept putting him down, and I recognized the irony of telling him to leave me alone so that I could prepare my presentation on parenting. But some days I get angry, and I wish I hadn't performed the way that I did. And would it be fair for my wife or any of you then to say, do you know, Dr. Swenson, I've seen that you can be great. I've seen when you're a great parent. I know you can when you try. And so when you're not great, it's because you're choosing to. Does that logic hold up? No. I mean, we all have our limits, right? When we're not functioning well, it's not always because we choose it. It's because of a lot of different reasons in the way that we're feeling. And yet I hear all the time from parents, I know that they can do it, and so when they're not doing it, they must be choosing. So I think we have to be really careful. Please start to believe that kids want to be good. And then we can trust that when we meet their needs, they will thrive. This requires a bit of faith, like I said. It's saying, I don't know why my kid is being the way he is, but if I can just be thoughtful and deliberate about his physical, safety, connection, and confidence needs, he will figure it out. That requires a little bit of faith. And notice I underlined we, that this is our responsibility, right? We're not saying anything here like, oh, well, kids need to be safe and connected, and so I'm going to go home and tell my kids to go out and make more friends so they can feel more connected. It is not their responsibility to feel that way, it's us. And so therapy helps, different kinds of intervention and coaching for kids helps, but at the end of the day, the natural caring systems, I learned that phrase from the United Way, it's the natural caring systems, the families, the churches, the neighbors, the schools, that have to collaborate to create this environment where kids feel this way. Okay, I want to go through some examples and see if this makes sense. Let's talk about May first. So imagine that May has been showing low frustration tolerance and even some aggression repeatedly over the past several weeks. She's an elementary school kid. She threw a volleyball at a peer's face and a pen across the classroom at her teacher. Real case. You pediatricians, you've heard this story all the time, haven't you? So what does May need? Do you want to speculate first on what May got? May got to stay in from recess and write thank you or write apology cards to whoever she was throwing things at. But in my lens, if you hold up that lens, I think you have to ask yourself about May. Could she be hungry or tired? Does she have sensory sensitivities? Just think about it. It doesn't mean this is the cause of her problem. It just means maybe we could be better at addressing her needs. Safety. Does she feel threatened or unsafe? Are adults safe? Does she have a secure living situation? Connection. How are her relationships? Is there a problem with communication? Does she have a receptive or expressive or pragmatic speech, communication problem where she only knows how to communicate through her actions and not her words? Does she have does she feel seen, valued, and loved? One of the favorite things that I've learned as a psychiatrist, a pearl, if you will, is that what people want more than anything else is what? To be seen. Seen. I would have thought loved, valued. They want people, this is the power of therapy sometimes, they want people to see them for who they are, the whole version of them, strengths, weaknesses, fails, successes, and to just see them and to communicate that I see you. I'm noticing, I'm watching, I'm interested, I'm admiring. People really, that really resonates. And so how do we help kids feel more seen in our attempt to connect? And then confidence. Is she frustrated with learning, task completion, problem solving, emotional regulation? Do I convey confidence? So these are all skills. Okay, so rather than looking at a behavior really quickly, what our approach is to say, I don't know why she threw the volleyball. I'm going to concede that I don't know. Some kids get angry, some kids get bullied, some kids have, and they don't throw a volleyball. So why did May decide to throw it? Is a combination of her genetics, her environment, her home life, her upbringing, her spirituality, her social life, all of those things we talked about? Probably. But what we know is that May needs things that everyone else needs. And we can feel confident that if we try to work through these needs and be better at addressing them, then her behavior will improve. How about Julia? I hope these examples are helpful. Julia is a 17-year-old whose behavior is increasingly difficult for her parents to manage. She refuses to follow rules, is falling behind in her classes, isn't attending church with the family. Her dress seems increasingly inappropriate. Family relationships are tense. This is a common kind of presentation. So what could you do? This is a quiz. You ready? Take away her phone. Restrict access to her friends. What do we call that? Grounding, right? She's grounded. Take away the car, maybe. Work on a communication style that feels safe for Julie to discuss family rules and religious expectations. Offer bigger or better rewards to motivate her to get better grades or go to church with the family. What do you guys think? You're good test takers, I hope. C. Take away the phone. Thanks. I hope that you can see that what my favorite would be, to work on a communication that would be safe. But I also hope that you can appreciate that the other three are the most commonly employed strategies. Take away her phone, restrict access to her friends, or bigger and better rewards to motivate her to get better and better grades. I want to talk about that in a minute. But let's just focus on the phone thing for a second, because this is a common question. When does a cell phone undermine basic human needs to feel safe, connected, and confident? This is not so easy as saying cell phones are good or bad. Social media is good or bad. Video games are good or bad. When do those things undermine feeling safe, connected, and confident, I think is a more useful question. And I think we can all think of situations when, wow, you seem pretty disconnected. And safety is becoming a problem because we don't have really an open relationship, or we're fighting all the time about whatever it is. But let me ask this. When does a cell phone help meet those needs? Are there some kids that feel safer having a cell phone? I mean, I can imagine that. More connected? Sure. More confident in some ways? Maybe. Right? So this is not, cell phones, as much as everyone wants to try to convince me that they are the cause of all of society's problems, I would be skeptical, you know, if you guys hear that, if that message is going around. I don't think there's good evidence for that. I think most reasoned, balanced perspectives are waiting to see. And at the end of the day, just like the causation, even if you knew, I would question whether it would be helpful. Because that's a big kind of society influence right now. So how can we figure out how to continue to meet kids' needs irregardless of where society goes? Consider this. If you take away her cell phone and ground her, and you're looking at that hierarchy, what have you just effectively done? You've taken the rug right out of connection, right? A teenager without a cell phone or friends. So I'm not saying you can't take away those things. I think you should be really thoughtful about it, particularly if your goal is better performance. If we're talking about confidence and competence, I'm going to take all of your social relationships away until you get better grades. Sounds to me to be kind of illogical. So we need to figure out something else. Nathan, how am I doing? Nathan's a teen who recently announced his intention to drop out of school, in part because he doesn't see any path to graduation due to excessive school absences and failed classes. School administrators say he's often found with friends who skip class to smoke weed. So he comes into me and says, I've just decided I'm not going to graduate. It's not worth it. I can't. I think it's impossible at this point. And the administrators hate me. And I start exploring with Nathan a little bit in this way. Safety. You know, how does he feel about his relationships? A good way to ask about safety, I really like this. I say on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 is another person who knows you perfectly, knows what it's like to be you, to live your life, the way you feel, the way you think. That's 100. Who knows you better than anyone else? And have them say, and then what score do they get? And kids whose highest score is like 50, 55, maybe my friend at school is 60, I really worry about them. I think that's a safety issue, that they don't feel safe to open up and be vulnerable and to be known. So do they feel safe? Connection, how are relationships with peers, parents, administrators? Do they feel seen and cared for? Unconditional positive regard? And confidence, how do we convey confidence? So Nathan, unfortunately, was on the verge of dropping out. He was labeled a troublemaker because he had skipped class, smoked a little weed, and didn't feel a great sense of safety. He didn't open up very easy. So I was privileged to be the first person who got to hear through a stream of tears that he'd been going to school but sitting in his car in the parking lot for 6 hours because he couldn't bear to go in and then would drive home. Does that sound like a troublemaker? Sometimes taking a little extra time to really connect and make him feel safe to share. That's a big, burly teenage kid doesn't ever want to admit that. Nathan was seen as being unmotivated, and I think this is, I hope, a useful example that I give when I talk about motivation. People say, well, the traditional way of raising kids is rewards and consequences. This is very different. And what I see with rewards and consequences feels a little bit like a guy trying to learn how to hit a baseball. And I like to imagine it's me because I have some humiliating moments in my life playing baseball. And imagine I'm trying to hit a baseball and you're saying, you can do it, keep your eye on the ball. You're yelling all those things. Where's Francis? He can help me remember the other things you yell to your kids when they're trying to hit a baseball. So you can do it, and you're trying to motivate me, and I swing and I miss, and I go, oh. And you say, okay, you just need a little more motivation. Let's bring in some more cheering. We'll bring in all your friends and family and everyone that you know, and they're watching you and cheering for you now. And I go, oh gosh, I'm motivated, right? And then maybe dad stands up in the outfield with a $100 bill, and he says, if you can hit it this time, you get $100. And that's the reward. And then we could do a consequence. We could have someone standing behind you with maybe like a baseball that's going to throw it at your legs if you miss. And if you miss, you're going to get pelted with a ball in the leg, right? That kid's standing there. Could he be any more motivated? But he might miss. Why? Because maybe he just can't hit a ball very good. And so we see this sometimes where our efforts to motivate kids with rewards, with consequences, to do better in school, to perform better, they go home having failed anyway, and then they feel even worse. I didn't get the $100, and I got hit with the ball, and everybody watched me fail, and then they just want to dig their heels in and say, forget you. And that's the kid who looks unmotivated, who says, I'm just not going to try. You can't make me. That's a kid saving face who's trying to say, I just can't. I can't. So efforts to motivate can backfire. Remember this, translating motivation, which is a want, into performance, which is a result, requires an ability, a skill. So sometimes when kids are not performing, we say that they're unmotivated. And in the example I gave before, they actually are. They want to be good. They want certain things, but they just can't. Even self-motivation, the way that we think about it, is a skill. If you don't want to do something, like come to this tonight, but you feel like you should, you have this remarkable ability to motivate yourself and to say, okay, I'll do this, I'll dedicate this much time, this is how I guess I'll make it fun. You know, I know that it'll take about this long, this is how I've done it before, I could bring somebody with me, 1, 2, 3, go. And it's this remarkable cognitive thing that we can do to self-motivate. So when we talk about kids not being motivated, I would look really closely at their ability. What is it that they're struggling to do? Because motivation happens naturally. If their needs are met, they will self-actualize. Every time I say that, I know that's like a principle of faith, but I believe it. I don't know how many. Let me do Carter, and then I'll decide. Does anyone? I'm sorry, I don't know how long I'm supposed to take. Does anyone know? I'm okay. Carter's 8 and has severe ADHD. His parents are exhausted by his behavior. I get a little emotional reading these because these are all my patients, and I see their faces. In fact, they report he lies about everything, has stolen from other students at school, and you talk about an ADHD kid lying and stealing, and inside I'm kind of giggling because I'm like, yeah, they do that. But then they said this: he recently scratched all the kitchen cabinets with a knife, and then even I went, I can't even imagine. So let me ask this question: why does Carter lie and steal? It was a trick question. You got it. Don't know. Doesn't matter. What strategies do you imagine his parents and teachers have already tried to improve his behavior? Just kind of for fun. He's been grounded a lot. They came in and they said, Dr. Swenson, nothing motivates this kid. We have literally taken everything away. And I go, well, we should try something else. So they had tried everything. What does Carter need? The same thing we all need. Now, I'm not saying that that's why he's scratching the kitchen cabinets. I'm just saying if we can be thoughtful, we, not a professional, if we can be thoughtful about saying, let's take a look at this kid's biology. You know, maybe he does need a little medication adjustment. That's, in my mind, right down there at physical needs. Like, we're thinking about that. But at the same time, we're thinking about how do we make it more safe to continue to mess up, because he's impulsive and he will continue to mess up. And at some point, if he gets lots and lots of negative feedback over several years, he's just going to dig his heels in. So how do we continue to make it okay to make mistakes, okay to talk, okay to be him, okay to explore, and especially the okay to be you. Okay, so none of what makes up you is very adaptive for elementary school right now, but can I focus on the things that I love about you and try to focus on those strengths so that he feels safe to be him? How do we continue to connect so that every time we ask Carter to stop, we don't feel like we're drawing out of an empty bank account? That our efforts to connect with him have been deposits. And that when I say stop, stop, then he doesn't look at me and feel empty inside. But he still looks at me as a loving dad who's putting as much in as I'm taking out. And then confidence. How do we continue to work with Carter on the skills that he needs to behave better? Self-regulation skills, self-management, organization, managing his impulses. We need to do all of that, but if we jump right to that and say we need to improve his behavior without thinking of everything else, the fact that, I mean, when do most kids do their worst? When they're tired, right? When my 5-year-old is driving me crazy, which happens a lot, I've just learned to say, wow, when did he sleep or eat last? I think that's really helpful. My wife likes to tease that the worst marriage advice that she got was to never go to bed angry. Because she said, after a few years, I realized when I'm angry, the most important need I have is to go to bed. And so you sort of have to think that direction. That happens a lot for her. I'm going to do at least one more. There's two more. The last two are really complicated situations, but I want to try to prove to you, because after presentations, people come up to me and say, well, that's nice and dandy for most people, but, and I go, oh no. There's two things. They either say, but, with my kid, it really is, biological. It really is his friends. And I go, oh, okay. Or they say, they come up to me after and they say, I understand that works for most kids, but I have a really complicated situation for you. So let me get you a really complicated situation. And it gets more complicated if you have time. Kobe's an 18-year-old who is somewhat estranged from his family, though he does live at home. He tells you that he feels isolated, lacks meaning in his life, and is having suicidal thoughts. He adds that he's demoralized by what he calls a porn addiction. Maybe that's not as hard as it sounds, but I'm curious. What could you do to care for Kobe's needs, to feel safe, connected, and confident? He's just told you he's suicidal. Do you know what a lot of people do when they hear that someone's suicidal? They do this, whether like in real life or it's just sort of communicated. They go, okay, stay right there. I'll be back. We need to go get some help. The ambulance comes or they're in a hospital before you know it. That kid isn't going to talk about his suicidal thoughts next time. I mean, you have to get help. But the most important thing to do in that moment is to make him feel safe for sharing something vulnerable and shameful, and to say, tell me more. I want to hear, and I can hear. If it's someone you love who's telling you they feel this way, you're kind of freaking out inside. But you have to be able to sit with them and say, keep going. That's okay. Thanks for telling me. How long have you been having suicidal thoughts? What do you think about? How intense is it? And what keeps you going? Why are you telling me? I'm so grateful you're telling me, but what can I do? Right? To keep going, you make it safe, you connect, which is, I just know how much I care about you. And then you go to confidence, which is collaboratively, what should we do? Or if you think they're safe, I think you're going to figure this out. Give yourself some time. Right? So that's what I would say. Even with the porn addiction, same thing. Thank you for telling me. I want to hear more. It's okay. What you've just told me doesn't distance us at all. It brings me closer. That's what you need to communicate. And then allow them to see what they can come up with to start working towards solutions for their own problem. But if you back away and run and try to fix everything, sometimes I tell people, the two most common cognitions of someone who's depressed. Have you guys ever had someone that's really close to you that's been depressed? I know we hear about it. I'm curious. Raise your hands if you've had someone really close to you. Oh, wow, that's even more than I thought. What they're most commonly thinking is either I'm broken in some way, and two, that I'm a burden on people around me. My life is a burden. And if you run in that moment that they've told you something to fix it, what have you accidentally communicated? That you need to be fixed, and that I'm the one that apparently has to do it. You've just, well-intentioned, you've reinforced what they feared. People can do more than we think. And one of the interesting secrets in life is that when, go back to that example where you came home and you were frustrated by your day. If your significant other did what they needed to do to be empathic, to make you feel safe and loved and seen and express confidence, you know this. Do you know what you would do after that conversation? You'd say, it's okay. Thanks for listening. I'll figure it out. People do that. I've seen this. When you meet those needs, they solve their own problem in remarkable ways that surprise you, even kids. I'm going to skip Maria. She's, I feel like maybe we should go a little faster. So there's a little video here. This is a video produced by the United Way to kind of introduce in a broader way this idea of everyday strong. And then I'll kind of wrap up and tell you where we're at with our efforts.
Kids who are hungry for safety, connection, and confidence every day, like, they're not their best selves.
I felt left out.
I didn't feel self-worth, really.
I think a good way to describe it would be like something kind of stuck in your throat and it's like slowly making its way up. Like I'm feeling it now because it's like kind of a stuck, like you're in between something.
Or a cracked phone in a world full of nice phones. You're like, oh, what happened? And you don't know, it's just, I dropped it, I need help.
There's always a reason behind somebody's behavior.
Many children are struggling more than they used to with anxiety and depression. What we're discovering is that some of the solutions may actually be simple acts in our everyday life that help a child feel safe, feel connected, and feel confident. The simple premise is everyday strong.
Who could they be if they did have those things? They would be the best version of themselves, right? Because when you feel good, you self-actualize. That's kind of a crazy big word. I don't know where that just came from. But it's that idea that they do what you would want them to do or what they can do because they can.
Most people, I think, feel sad because they're not understood.
It's not doing harsh discipline, it's having consistent communication.
Just talking and feeling that no one's going to laugh at them. No one's going to think that they're weird.
Oh, I'm okay, and this is normal, and this does happen to other people.
And looking for opportunities to engage them, to say, wow, job well done. Help build their confidence in who they are.
Something that they know is a fact. Today I was good at that one thing and somebody noticed.
Then suddenly the tree starts to thrive again because they're not in their little dark room alone.
They feel like, okay, I've got people around me, I've got some help, I'm gonna be okay. It was fun to see that transformation, and it took a long time, but I knew she was a different person the day she said hi to me before I even saw her. But I got tears in my eyes.
You know, you take these little opportunities and you find out how big they are. I look into their faces and I know their struggles. And I know what they're fighting for, and to see that light click on in them is absolutely priceless.
If all of us ask ourselves, what did we do today to help that child feel safe? What did we do to help that child feel connected? And what did we do to help that child feel confident?
I feel like that's the easiest, shortest to-do list, and it's fail-proof.
If we use that as a measurement of our lives of interacting with so many of our children and young adults, we really can turn the corner on this very complex and challenging problem.
You can help them help themselves, which is what we want our kids to be able to do.
Everybody has a role to play. Okay, what can I do?
I always tease Bill with the United Way. I feel like we could do an advanced course another time on the way that this really simple paradigm really reflects, in my reading, all of the psychological literature. People have a lot of different ways of looking at their particular theory, but I think this is a really useful way of looking at really what kids need. And I don't think that you'll find that it's in conflict with anything else out there. In fact, I think it's interesting to think of the principles of safety, connection, and confidence and how that parallels the resiliency literature. So we're talking about, to be clear, kids who are struggling, but also kids who are just living their lives, and that we need to be thoughtful in our everyday deliberate behavior. This is where Everyday Strong comes from. We're not asking you to do a lot of different things. It's about looking at a lens, looking at what you're already doing every day, and in a slightly more deliberate way in trying to, create an environment of safety, connection, and confidence. We really feel like if we can get people on the same page in our schools, with our pediatrician colleagues in the doctor's offices, with other community leaders, then we can have kind of a shared language and approach, and then let everybody's sort of creativity spin out from there. It's been really exciting for me to begin to sort of present this to different places in the community and see what the school district and others have done to run with it. But I'll tell you briefly that we have a lot of big ideas. We have a resiliency handbook that I think you might be able to view today, or at least go online and see it there. It's a place where you can print out a little handbook that says, okay, where do I start? What does it mean? What are some specific concrete ideas for me to begin to build connection with the kids in my life and within my influence? And it gives you just sort of lists of lots of different things you can try. There's a thing called a journey to Everyday Strong, which is if you really want to kind of take a challenge and challenge yourself to work through safety, connection, and confidence in your interactions from day to day. That's one thing you can do to start. We're partnering with pediatric groups and also with all of the school districts that are represented here and training their school counselors to take this and run with it. The entire Alpine School District bought little lanyards with their name tags on it this last year, and they're teasing me a little bit, but it says, bringing Maslow back. Trying to make it cool again, to think about these really basic needs. We're going to be doing some presentations in the fall for the entire, at least Alpine School District, probably Nebo and Provo as well, where we're going to grow into an everyday strong in schools strategy and thinking about how to apply these principles for kids in schools, particularly those that have different kinds of learning and behavioral challenges. We want to keep growing. The limitations are partnerships and funding. I'm giving 3 talks in the next few weeks, and my colleagues are giving some as well, where they say, can you bring printed materials for us? And we say, well, at this point we're working on it. We need a little more funds to even print some of our materials and to do some of the things that we want to do. We'd like to grow not just with this philosophy and growing it within our natural support systems, but there are kids who need formal treatments. They need the programs that exist in the community, and no one is better than the United Way to set up those allies and to help them build what will support what we're doing. And so the community partnerships in improving what we're all doing in terms of mental health is important and is a big part of the funding that we're trying to raise as well. If I could wish for anything, this is true. This is like, the beauty pageant where they say, what would you wish? And they would say world peace. For me as a child psychiatrist, with the joy and the heartache, with the love that I have for my patients and the interactions that I have with parents every day, I really feel that the biggest difference I could make is for more adults to ask themselves every day, what can I do to help the children in my life feel safe, connected, and confident? If you had that question on your mind all the time, you'd be surprised about how little effort can really move the needle and solve, I think, some of the problems that you're looking at. Now, I had a slide to take questions, but I think maybe, I don't know, can someone tell me if I have a few minutes? 3 minutes. I have 3 minutes. Should we do, I don't know if anyone would be brave enough to ask questions, but let's open it up, and if you think you have a question that a lot of people would share, or that is really unique to you, or you're just sitting there still kind of not convinced, could be a challenge too. I should have warned you in advance, I would ask. I'll also stick around a little bit after if you have kind of something you'd like to talk about privately. Oh, you're so brave.
This is one of those why questions that you don't like to get. Is there any research that has been done to show if anxiety has a genetic propensity?
Yes, so the question is there a genetic propensity to anxiety? And I can easily say yes. There really seems to be a genetic influence in all of these things that we see and treat. And I can't give you the exact numbers for anxiety. Anxiety in particular is a little tricky. When we say anxiety, technically we break it down to different kinds of anxieties. You have social anxiety and generalized anxiety. Sometimes obsessive compulsive disorder falls into that category. Panic disorder. They're all slightly different. Anxiety is a little trickier though, because clearly there's genetic influences. Clearly there's environmental influences, but that's where you also get into these epigenetics, where people are talking about how behavior and environment and what you experience can in some ways change the expression of your DNA to be passed down over time. So there does seem to be this interesting problem where you have anxiety that is biological, anxiety that is epigenetic, and then anxiety that is modeled is hard to tease out as well, because when we model that the world is scary, kids grow up feeling that the world is scary. And you say, well, anxious parents have anxious kids. It's sometimes hard to tease out. I do think it's important for us to be aware that these things can run in families, but also know that kids often do as well as their parents do. That's true for trauma. If there's been a traumatic experience, they say, it's easy for parents to go, oh my gosh, this happened to my kid. And we raise all the alarms, or we get angry, or we try to fix it, and we make this big to-do about it, and you do have to address it. But if we can't contain our own emotions, it's harder to model that. Kids look to us for that kind of stability. So I think acknowledge that anxiety runs in families, but I think an honest, introspective parent will say, one of the first things I need to do for my child's anxiety is to get in touch with the way that anxiety affects me and affects my parenting and affects my communication. It's not all that. It's all of those things. I hope that helps.
So these are wonderful tools. I think they're great. What I'm wondering is there a place, because for instance, where there's just no reason why you feel that way, like my daughter, who's just, you know, everything great, but she had postpartum depression, and it was really something that just needed to be treated medically.
Yeah.
With medication. So
yeah.
Do you have a place for that too?
I think that fits. I mean, I think you're right. You see someone with postpartum depression. I don't need to look at someone with postpartum depression and say, well, this is a biological problem. I think that's clearly a part of it. And I think most people that treat postpartum depression will tell you that you actually get a little more headway with medicines with postpartum depression than you do, you know, other kinds of depression. So there clearly is a biological factor as part of it. I just think we're narrow if we say this is a biological problem and you just need medicine, because you might be wrong. And I don't think it is necessarily biological or heavily biological in every case. And I don't think there's ever any way that we're going to know how much of it is biological and will respond to medicines versus anything else. So I would still take the same approach and look at somebody and say, man, you know, what can I do to help you get rest, get proper nutrition, consider being on a medicine if needed. Safety. How important is safety to really make progress in postpartum depression? Safety to say, I'm depressed. I don't feel like a good mom. I feel like I hate my baby right now. I feel like a failure. Do moms want to say that? That's really key to their healing, though. So I think you can't just say, well, this is a medicine problem. That could be part of your toolbox. But again, you might be right, you might be wrong. You will always feel confident that you're on the right track if you're approaching it with this more holistic perspective and say, I want to help you get sleep. If medicine is important, let's do that. I want you to feel safe to talk and to be normal and to have difficulty. I want to connect with you and be there for you and see you, not just give you a bunch of advice. And I want, you know, if there's some things, other things we could do on top of that. So I think even if you suspect that there's a particular category, this is true for medically, this is what I want to do with the pediatricians, to just say you have asthma or diabetes type 1 and to spend a bunch of time saying, well, this is how you care for it, misses the opportunities to say, well, here's the physical part of that. Let's talk about what it means to be able to talk about this at home, the kind of safety thing when you're feeling discouraged with giving yourself insulin. Can you really talk about it? Can you talk about how frustrating it is? How many have ever had a loved one with a terminal diagnosis? Do you know what happens in those situations all too often? They focus on that physical part. Obviously, you need the physical care. And you say, okay, well, when's your next doctor's appointment, and how are you feeling, and how'd the surgery go, and everything goes on sort of that dominates the entire conversation, and you miss a really valuable opportunity to say, how do we all feel about what's happening right now and the fact that you're dying? Is it safe to talk about how I feel and how you feel? Can we communicate? Can we connect? Can we take this golden moment to do all of these other meaningful things that we need if we're going to get through this together? So irregardless of where you are, it's not so simple as saying, well, checkbox, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. The bottom needs are more important, but let's not neglect any of them in the care and the love that we're trying to provide for people. So am I out of time? I feel like one more quick question.
Yeah, I'm in exploring children who are challenging their faith and their religious practices. We're seeing more and more of this. How do we work with them? I'm thinking particularly safety and safety to fail when failure in that regard to us has, you know, long-term consequences. And so how do we create a safe environment in the context of challenging religious belief?
Well, if it's just about religious belief and not performance, performance is one thing, kind of, are you doing the right religious things, or you feel like you're failing. I think there's some strategies for that, like sharing more openly and consistently our own failings and our own difficulties and our own struggles. Our kids see the parents as sort of perfect sometimes, and I think that creates expectations that are hard. I think if it's really just about beliefs, it's the duct tape thing. You know, kids can start talking about, well, I don't believe this, or I don't think that, or that's stupid to me, and because it's such an important core of who we are and what we believe, I've seen parents that just can't tolerate that. They get a little defensive and they argue, or they say, blah, 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 and the kid shuts down. It's not safe, and safe really has to be duct tape. And the kind of empathy that says, I can see where that would be hard. That's fair. You know, these things are hard. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for opening up. It's really hard because the things that mean the most to us are the hardest to sit through. And so I tease with the duct tape, but it really might be one of your more important parenting tools. Remember that you know, parenting is not a skill. It's a relationship. The psychologists say it's not something that we learn to do. We just have to feel. You have to feel that kind of connection. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say on that, but thank you for the question. I think that's unfortunately my time, but I do want to turn the time over to a couple of other friends to just kind of summarize. I think Sam Jarman was going to come up next if he's here, who's the superintendent for the Alpine School District, who's been an incredible support for us.